Hello and welcome to Derbyshire, one of the most haunted counties in England. My name's Richard Felix, and 8 years ago I started the legendary Derby Ghost Walk around the centre of the city of Derby, the county town of Derbyshire. Derbyshire being such an inhospitable place, certainly during the winter, many farmers and villagers tended to be holed up during the winter and only seeing their local villagers and their own families. And then of course when they were eventually released, when the snows and the rains and winds had gone, they then came out into the towns and the villages back to market. And this is of course where many of the stories and legends have arisen from their stories when they came back after the long, deep, dark winter. Derbyshire, a place of myths and legends, of standing stones, prehistoric trackways, and many ley lines, which were power lines and trackways leading through Derbyshire, is one of the reasons I believe that it has become such a haunted place. So settle back and let us take you on a tour of haunted Derbyshire.
Here we are at Elverston Castle, one of the many stately homes still preserved in Derbyshire, although this place goes back to the time of the Vikings. It was called Elvoldstune. Someone called Elvold, a Viking, lived here many years ago, but now you can see the 1813 castle built on top of much earlier foundations. And if we go around the corner here, we can see the 16th century bit. Just look at the difference in the brickwork. This goes back to the 1600s, and there's a ghost of a lady been seen inside this Elizabethan part of the castle. She's seen through this window here, wearing white, and she's been seen moving from side to side, backwards and forwards, as if she's sitting in a rocking chair. Many people have seen her from outside here, and many of the staff that work in the castle have seen her on the inside. She's also been seen walking along this pathway which leads to the church and the churchyard. No one's quite sure whether she's actually a churchyard ghost or a castle ghost, because she's been seen in both locations and of course passing between. But let's go and have a look at the churchyard. These are the gates to the churchyard. This is the burial place of the Earls of Harrington. The first thing that greets us when we're here is this rather incredible gravestone. I'll read it to you. It's in memory of Stephen Alcock, who departed this life September the 18th, 1842. I once did stand as thou dost stand now, and viewed the dead as thou dost me. Ere long thou'lt lie as low as I, and others stand and look on thee. Sobering thought. We're now heading towards the mausoleum, the crypt, where all the Earls of Harrington and the Duchesses of Harrington are also buried over here. But there's a very interesting grave on the other side of the graveyard. The yew hedge of course finishes here, but we're going out of the graveyard through this gap to visit someone else, not buried in the crypt with the other Harringtons. Rather overgrown area here, weeds, nettles, a large tree and a grave by it. And this is the grave of Kathleen Emily, widow of Dudley Henry Eden, the 9th Earl of Harrington. Born 4th of November 1862, died the 6th of August 1949. She was the wife of the Earl of Harrington. Why is she buried outside the graveyard? And not only buried outside the graveyard, but her grave's the wrong way round. She's facing the wrong way. No one really knows why she's out here, unless there was a family rift, perhaps she divorced the Earl, we don't know. But there's a ghost in this graveyard of a lady, a white lady, that's been seen wandering around the graveyard. People have seen her at the dead of night, stopping and looking at different gravestones and shaking her head. Perhaps it's the ghost of Kathleen Emily that isn't resting because she's not buried in the graveyard, or she's not with her husband just over the wall here where the mound is, in the Harrington's family crypt. No one knows. And next to the grave of Kathleen Emily we have the Happy Huntsman's tree. The Earl of Harrington was a famous fox hunter, and he was killed in a hunting accident in February 1917. And his hounds weren't brought out again for ages. But he left in his will a statement saying that on Boxing Day every year his hounds should hunt. The hounds were let out of the stables here at Elveston, but they couldn't get them to go anywhere. They were ran round and round in a circle around this area and gathered under this tree. And they couldn't get them to come away from this tree. And they say that the ghost of the Earl of Harrington haunts this area around the tree. But of course you must remember that this tree is in very close proximity to the mausoleum where the Earl's buried. Through this gate here, the mausoleum of all the Earls of Harrington. They're all buried in lead-lined coffins on shelves in full view through that large lead double door down those steps. How many folks have driven either north or south along the M1 and seen Bolsover Castle on one side and looked over up this hill and seen this gaunt, decaying ruin on the top of the hill here and wondered what it was and who lived here? This is Sutton Scarsdale Hall, the home of the Leake family for many hundreds of years, and a very, very haunted house indeed. Let's go in and have a look. And this is the interior, or what's left of the interior, of Sutton Scarsdale Hall. Many, many ghost stories to do with this place. Stories of dismembered arms floating, orange and white balls of light floating in the sky, smells of tobacco, footsteps, screams. But something actually happened to me when I came here a few years ago to do a Radio Derby broadcast. And we arrived with the radio car and parked just at the front here, hoping to get a signal. There's a very large mast just over the hill here, so there wouldn't have been any problem whatsoever in getting a signal. But just as we were going to go live, the signal disappeared. So very quickly we got the portable telephone out to try and do it over the telephone, but unfortunately the same thing applied. There was no signal from the telephone either. So we had to abandon it and go round the front of the building to see if we could do something from there. Everything was fine until we drove round there, put the mast up again, and exactly the same problem. We could not get a signal back to Derby from here under any circumstances, either telephone or radio. But as we drove down the drive, within 100 yards of this place, the portable phone went. And it was Radio Derby ringing us to see why they couldn't get through to her. There's absolutely no problems, but for some strange reason, no signals can be sent out from this place. And all the ghostly problems seem to emanate from the cellars of Sutton Scarsdale. This is the way down. It's locked, but we won't let that deter us, will we? I'm not going alone. Here we are in the bowels, the depths of Sutton Scarsdale Hall. I haven't even got a torch with me, and I'm not going to go too far because I don't know where these tunnels go to, and I don't want to disappear. But this is the problem place down here. This is where the smell of tobacco has been smelt by people from English heritage that have been working on renovating the building. This is where they've heard the footsteps down there in the inky blackness. And they believe that perhaps some awful deed was committed down here in the old cellars of the hall. These in fact look more like prison bars than cellarage doors, but who knows what happened down here. But I've stayed long enough. I'm getting out of here. And we're in the graveyard at Sutton Scarsdale. This is one of the most atmospheric and some of the oldest gravestones that I've seen in any graveyard in Derbyshire. And there are a couple of legends to do with the church and the graveyard. One of Sir Francis Leake, a royalist who was captured by Cromwell's soldiers and escaped to join the king. He was created First Lord Scarsdale. When the king was executed, Sir Francis had his own grave dug, and every Friday he dressed in sackcloth and laid in his open grave in commemoration of the king. Another legend to do with the Crusades and Sir Nicholas Leake. He, before leaving for the Crusades, took out his sword and split his wedding ring in half, giving half to his wife and keeping half. He was captured during the Crusades and spent many years in a dark, dank prison. One day, dreaming of home, he was transported through the air and landed in the porch here at the church. He went to the doors of his house and demanded to be let in, but of course he was in such a bad state they didn't recognise him. He then remembered that he'd still got the split ring. He took it out of his pocket and told them to give it to his wife. She put the two pieces together and realised that her beloved was home. And every year Sir Nicholas had bread baked for the poor people of this parish, distributed it to them with a large N for Sir Nicholas stamped on it. And the ghost of Sir Nicholas still haunts the porchway of this churchyard. Derbyshire's very much a place of legend, of mystery, of stone circles and burial grounds. Most of them tend to be up in the high peak, the dark peak, but this one here on Stanton Moor, not far from Matlock, is a very interesting one. This is the Nine Ladies, a very strange, inhospitable place. Bronze Age, many burials round here, and quite a few hauntings, of course. A black dog, a large black dog, is known to wander around the hills and in and out of the trees. A man dressed in black has often been seen standing just on the outside of these stones. And a lady in grey is often seen walking the pathways round here. But these circles have a very special legend behind them. The Nine Ladies were said to have been dancing on the Sabbath. And this large stone at the end here, known as the fiddler's chair, and sat on this stone playing his fiddle for the 9 ladies to dance was none other than the devil himself. God was not happy at this, and so he turned all of them into stone. And these are the 9 ladies of stone that can still be seen here to this day. And here we are in historic Chesterfield, Derbyshire's largest town, home to murderers, myths and legends. In fact, the last 3 men hanged in Derby jail were all Chesterfield men. The spire of the church twisted many years ago, possibly because unseasoned timbers were used, but I prefer the story when the devil visited Chesterfield and landed on the spire of the church. He twisted his tail around the spire to hang on. There was a wedding going on, and as the bride and groom came out, the bride was wearing white. And much to the shock and horror of the devil, he flew from the top of the spire without removing his tail, which of course caused the spire to twist. The reason that the devil flew down to look at the bride and groom was because the bride was a virgin, and the devil had never seen a virgin in Chesterfield before. Many other stories. We're here now in New Square, and there was a house here that belonged to a Dr. Jones. They've now built the Yorkshire Bank on the site. He had it named the Old Manor House, which was incorrect, but there are various ghost stories to do with this building. A lady who used to live there told of the story of her aunt who was visiting, and on the top floor, on the corridor, she saw a little girl wandering along the corridor. The lady was so surprised she wondered who the girl was, and she bent down to pick her up, to grab hold of her, and her hands and arms just passed through the apparition. The lady flew down the stairs without touching any of them. She didn't touch the stairs at all. Other stories to do with the same lady. Her grandmother had also seen the ghost of a man wandering around the dining room, but he was wearing chains, he was shackled, and she could hear the chains clanking. She was terrified, and she slammed the dining room door closed and locked it to wait for her husband coming home. But she heard the clanking of the chains coming through the door. She left the building and was sitting outside on the pavement here, waiting for her husband to come home. And another member of the family who also saw something so horrific and frightening that she dare not tell anyone of it, but she solved the problem herself with her own form of exorcism. She threw the Holy Bible at the ghost, and the ghost was never seen again. In 1675, a rather intriguing pamphlet was issued onto the streets of London. It had the very strange title, Strange and Terrible News from Chesterfield in Derbyshire, being a full and true relation of a horrible and terrible ghost that was visibly seen on Sunday the 24th of January 1674, first in the shape of a dog, then a woman, and afterwards a man, together with the discovery of some money that was hidden by him in his lifetime as a burglar. Signed by Richard Hobbs, Constable, James Nitt, Constable, Joseph Wilson, Churchwarden, and Mr. Brown, Gentleman. This pamphlet relates to a very interesting incident that took place here in 1674 in Chesterfield, when an old couple were woken at about 3:30 in the morning to loud bangings on the door of their house. The gentleman came out to find a large black dog growling and snarling at him. He slammed the door shut and went back to bed. The following evening, the same thing happened again, another knocking on the door. This time, the old guy opened the door to find a woman draped in white clothing with blood stains all over her clothes. Again, the old man slammed the door and went back to bed. The third night, hammerings again on the door, and the old man plucked up the courage yet again to come and open the door. This time there was a man standing wearing black clothes, larger than life figure. But he had such a soft voice that he calmed the old man down, and the figure, or spectre, asked the man if he would accompany him to a field nearby to find some lost treasure. The old man plucked up the courage and went with the spectre and found a hoard of treasure. The spectre, or the ghost, explained that it was treasure that he'd stolen from someone when he'd been a burglar when he was alive, in his earlier life. The spectre asked the man if he would return the treasure to its rightful owner, and the old man promised to do this. He spent a lot of time searching out the person who it belonged to and returned it to him, and the ghost or spectre was never seen again. Perhaps this is the very doorway that's been bricked up to actually stop that spectre from coming and knocking on this door again. Who knows? A colour photograph taken here in the 14th century church of St Werburgh's by Miss Jenny Nichols shows a blue shadowy figure, the figure of a ghost, standing just about here where I am. But when she was taking the photograph, there was nobody there. And that photograph is, in my opinion, one of the few photographs that appear to be genuine. I've seen many pictures of ghosts in the past, and most of them don't look like a ghost, but I must admit the blue lady at St Werburgh's seems to be genuine to me, and I'm standing more or less on the spot where she was seen. And the blue lady here at St Werburgh's is reputed to be Elizabeth Gilbert, wife of Henry Gilbert, Squire of Lochow Park. Her stepmother was Shakespeare's granddaughter. This is the monument to that great lady, Elizabeth Gilbert, the Blue Lady of St Werburgh's. When we started to research the Blue Lady of St Werburgh's, all we'd got was a rather old and faded newspaper clipping from the Derby Evening Telegraph of 1989. But since then, we've managed to locate the original slide taken by Miss Gwen Nichols in 1976. Now, I've seen lots of photographs of alleged ghosts, and most of them, in my opinion, are not genuine. This one, I'm not so sure about. But we've got with us Steve, who's the photographer for Past in Pictures videos, and Steve has done a lot of work in the past on restoration of photographs for various heritage centres, including Alfreton, Derby, Ripley and many others. Steve, what do you think?
Well, Richard, basically we've got two things here. We've got the original piece of celluloid film, which is amazing, say it's back from 1976. What I've done is actually scan this into the computer, and there she is, the Blue Lady. Yeah. Now, if we zoom in on her, we can magnify her quite a lot. Yeah. We can actually see down here an arm, yep, a dress and a head. Now, if we turn the saturation up, which basically means make all the colours come a lot brighter, we can see that she's see-through. Yeah. We can see like a hazy blue glow around her. Yeah. And in 1976, of course, there wasn't this computer technology around. It just did not exist. And basically it took away a lot of ways in which pictures could be faked or forged. Yeah, superimposed. Well, things. If I zoom in onto the pixels at the edge of this glow, all the pixels are the same shape, same size. This is not basically a fake. I can categorically state that. It is not a fake. Right. Now, also what we have is, because it's on film, we basically have evidence that it wasn't a paper photograph, which had been cut out with a scalpel, stuck on, and done this way, you see. It is actually on celluloid, a slide film.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, that this here, whatever this is on the film. It's there for all to see.
Right. Well, there you have it. Possibly a genuine photograph of the Blue Lady of St Werburgh's Church. This is the Peacock Inn at Oakerthorpe. It's one of the oldest coaching inns in Derbyshire, and it's situated on the main London to Sheffield road. And before that, this road was the Roman road called Ricknell Street. Legend has it that the ghost of Dick Turpin can be seen at the back of this building in a sunken stable where he used to stable his horse, Black Bess. He is supposed to have stayed here on his famous ride from London to York. This building goes back to the time of the Domesday Book and was part of an old monastery that was round here, administered by what were known as the White Monks, and it was known as Ufton Barn. It's not that far from Wingfield Manor, a famous old hall where Mary Queen of Scots was imprisoned, and there is a tunnel underneath this building that leads all the way from here right through to Wingfield Manor, and it's supposed to be an escape route where Mary Queen of Scots tried to escape her captivity, but she didn't manage it. But the tunnel is the haunted part of this building. So let's go down and have a look. And this is it, we're now inside the Peacock. And this is the way down to the cellars and the tunnel. Mind your heads. Of course, when you get to this part, it just looks like any other cellar. Nice whitewashed, until you turn the corner here and you see the barrel vaulted part of what's a bit more sinister down here, and very, very dark. And now feeling my way literally along this little barrel vaulted cellar and tunnel which leads me through, and then on the right hand side here is the gap, and it takes you straight down through the inky blackness and down into the old tunnel that leads all the way to Wingfield Manor. I might as well just take a trip down in the inky blackness and have a look. It's usually very wet down here, and I don't think I can get much farther. Oh yes, I'm down. And that's me just about to disappear. I hope nothing comes up to see me, because this is where the white and I don't like this. Right, and now we're inside the newly refurbished Peacock Inn, and just around the corner here, the cellar. Nice and light here, to mind your head as you go down, but quite clean and white, just like any other cellar really. Nothing to get excited about at all. Not until you turn here and then you see parts of the old original barrel vaulted tunnel that starts here. It gets very dark, very damp, very smelly as we make our way along the tunnel here. As far as here, this is as far as we get, because down here on the right hand side is the cutaway from the original tunnel that goes all the way to Wingfield Manor. And I've got to get myself down there into the dark, but it's very dark. So I think the first thing I need to do is to just give myself a bit of light. Not a lot, but it'll help. It's not nice down here, by the way. Not for the faint-hearted. Because you never know what you're going to meet coming up. It also floods and you never know whether you're going to get your feet wet. And it stretches on, and I'm going down, down ever deeper. Wondering how far I'm going to get before I actually either see something or hit the water level. But as yet I'm alright. I didn't like that. That candle went out. I didn't like that at all. That was not part of the show. And I'm going to try very quickly and light it again. That just went out for absolutely no reason whatsoever, and that was not fixed. The tunnel is down here, but undaunted, I'm going on. All of a sudden, it just decides that it's going to go out, and I'll tell you something. I'll tell the story now before I get any farther. Round here, through there, is the tunnel, dug, they believe, originally by the white monks. They think it could well have been as a coal mine, but a number of monks were killed during the digging, and a lot of the staff that come down here where the barrels are have seen a ghostly figure of a monk dressed in white with a hood but with no face, hovering above the ground, hovering towards them. And I'll be quite honest with you, there are very few members of the staff here that will actually venture down into these cellars alone. They usually go in pairs. Other things have happened. Glasses blow up like laminated windscreens. And it's a long time since I've felt as nervous about anything as I am here, because as soon as I move the candle towards the start of the tunnel, it decides to go out. But it's gone, that's it, I'm out of here. I'm not going in there. And that's the end of it. Just look at this. Sitting here on the top of a hill in Amber Valley in Derbyshire, Wingfield Manor, one of the most haunted manor houses in Derbyshire. Haunted by royalty, plotters, traitors, monks, royalists, they're all here. This has got to be one of the gems in Derbyshire's crown. And we're now entering the ruined remains of Wingfield Manor. This was built by Ralph, Lord Cromwell, treasurer to Henry VI, and was one of the finest medieval mansions in England. Mary Queen of Scots was imprisoned here on 3 occasions: 1584, 1585, 1586. The ruins of her apartments are behind me here. And she was executed because of a man called Anthony Babington, who was plotting to murder Queen Elizabeth. He lived near here at Dethick, and he used to visit Mary by climbing over the walls and getting into her apartments. He used to dress as a gypsy, and he used to crush walnuts and use the juice to smear onto his hands and face to give him a dusky complexion. This huge old tree behind me is a walnut tree, and legend has it that it's grown from one of the walnuts dropped by Anthony Babington when he was visiting Mary Queen of Scots here in Derbyshire. Right, I think it's time for us to take a trip down into the Undercroft, the crypt, the haunted part of the castle. This crypt runs underneath Wingfield Manor, and this is the place where both the ghosts of Mary Queen of Scots and Anthony Babington have been seen in this very ancient Undercroft. She was executed because of the plot of Babington. It was a horrendous execution. She came down the main staircase of Fotheringay Castle dressed in black, took off a black dress to reveal a scarlet or crimson petticoat, the sign of a martyr, a Catholic martyr. A handkerchief was tied around her eyes, and she knelt with her head on the block. The executioner took his first blow. First blow. It bit into the back of her head, She turned her head towards him, saying, "Sweet Jesus!" And he bade her to put her head back on the block. Then he took a second blow. Still the head wasn't severed, and he had to take his pocket knife and cut the last sinews of Mary's neck. He held the head aloft, crying the words, "So perish all enemies of Elizabeth." And the head dropped out of the red wig that Mary was wearing and bounced across the scaffold floor. The lips continued to quiver a quarter of an hour after her head was cut off. The head was then taken and placed on a huge platter and placed in one of the windows of Fotheringay Castle, with a candle put in front of it, so that the world could see that Mary Stuart was finally dead. She died because of a man from Derbyshire called Anthony Babington, and both their ghosts still linger around Wingfield Manor, united in death, not in life. And this is Carnfield Hall. In my opinion, one of the most haunted houses in Derbyshire. And we're actually going in here. We're going to meet the owner of this property, James Cartland. James Cartland, I presume.
That's
So,
right,
how are you?
Richard. Hello, do come in.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to Carnfield.
Thank you. Just look at this. Have you ever seen such treasures in all your life?
Well,
And the stories.
I can't guarantee we're going to see one of these ghosts, which I think you've come to see, but
Well,
you never know.
Well, even if we don't see
Yes.
them, can we hear about them?
Yeah, well, we might be able to. We don't have any rattling chain ones, though, or ones in white sheets, I'm afraid.
No, but what you've got's
But,
quality.
oh, yes. Well, we hope so. Well, there are lots of stories connected with this house that they're a bit unprovable, really, but it's funny how stories get tied to a house and they go on. There's often some grain of truth in it,
Oh, yes.
that people really do believe
Yes,
that they've
yes,
seen things.
Yes, I'm sure.
And when it comes down through generations and several different people tell you the same story, you begin to think that there must be something in it.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, there's very little, hardly ever smoke without fire, is there?
That's right, yes. And this house has been standing here for at least 500 years. And you think of all the people who've lived here and died here and had a happiness and sorrow and whatever.
Exactly.
It's stuck in the walls,
It's
perhaps.
got to be something.
Yes,
Yeah. Can we have a look around?
absolutely, yes. Well, this is the Great Hall, yes. We don't have anything in here that I know of, because there are various stories about outside, like there's meant to be a ghostly gamekeeper who walks in the park
Right.
that's apparently been seen. I've met several people who've apparently seen him, who live in the village, and that goes back a long way. Parents saw him.
Yeah.
And there's a story I've just heard about apparently a ghostly coach and six
Across the road,
that
right.
drives across the road down the original drive.
That's at the back here, of course.
Yes, at the back where the front of the house originally was, in Elizabethan Jacobean times. And it's extraordinary, the stories. And then, of course, when we get to the other side, there's the story of the children who play on the lawn.
Oh, yes.
Yes, but we can look at that on the...
Yes. Now, have you not had problems here with the staircase, with sounds and things here on the...
Definitely, there has been something seen at the bottom of here,
Yeah.
but I can't say that I've ever actually seen anything
No.
here. I've heard things, and it's surprising the number of visitors I get who sense something without me saying anything. And I always wait. I don't draw people's attention to ghosts.
They say to you, "Is this place haunted?"
That's right, and then, which is a natural thing, I suppose.
Yeah,
And then what happens is that they say it's very cold here. Something's happened just here, and I think definitely I've heard footsteps up here,
Really?
and there's no doubt about that at all.
But I mean, how long has this staircase been here?
1627 it was put here.
Well,
So think of all the Derbyshire people who've walked up these stairs.
yeah.
And all those ancient people in their farthingales and tricorn hats.
And some of them still doing it, probably.
Maybe.
Right.
Well, do come into the great parlour.
Right. Now, this would have been, of course, there would have been no floor here.
That's right,
When
yes.
Where we were downstairs.
Went
Straight
right up to the roof, that's right, with a,
Yeah.
fire in the middle and rooks flying about and lots of smoke. Jolly unpleasant, I should
can
think.
imagine.
But I bet they had a few good times here.
I bet they did.
Then in the late 16th century, it was the fashion to fill these in and to have an upstairs chamber. And this would have been the sort of entertaining room and the room they lived in, really. You know,
Yes.
Elizabethan and Jacobean time. So you can imagine the revels who lived here.
Yeah.
You know, the revel ladies would sat in here and done their needlework and sewed. Well, we know they sewed hangings for the rooms because I've got lists of the beautiful hangings that were in inventories.
Really?
All, you know, bedspreads and curtains and embroidered hangings.
And parties would have taken place
That's right, yes.
in here.
And of course, this is the room in which we, a few years ago, I had some ghost hunting people, rather well-known ones,
Yes.
and completely authentic ones, and they set some machinery up in here, and we got some harpsichord music being played, very distantly, very faint, but you could tell what it was. And a friend of mine listened to it a few months later and said, "Oh, that's an organ harpsichord." And I thought, "What on earth's that?" And he said, "Well, that's a very rare instrument. You know, it'd be like a Rolls Royce compared to a Ford Fiesta," which, apologies to those who have a Ford Fiesta, but that's the sort of equivalent. And I thought no more of it until just soon after that. I was looking at an inventory in 1727, and guess what stood in the dining room here? An organ harpsichord, which was the most expensive instrument and was a wedding present in 1666 from Sir Nicholas Wilmot to his daughter, who married Francis Revel.
That would be the Wilmots of Chattersea?
Osmaston.
Osmaston.
That's right.
And you heard their harpsichord?
Yes,
They
apparently.
heard.
Well, it was very faint,
Yeah.
but then we discovered, you see, I had discovered it was in the dining room.
Right. It
So,
would have been very faint coming from downstairs.
yes, well, it suddenly struck me that that would be the way to do it. So I played some harpsichord music in the dining room on a recorder.
Yeah.
We shut the doors until we got it just right, and you could hear it in just the same way. Absolutely extraordinary. And so my guess is that that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Amazing.
And then we had another thing here not long ago where somebody was doing some filming, and when the film was developed, they were doing it with their hands so that you got the shadows. We were filming it from outside with the shadows of the hands as if there was a dance, because there's a legend that there's a ghostly ball that takes place here every year, but I've never been invited. It was Robert Revel in 1700 was made High Sheriff of Derbyshire, and he gave this ball. Said to be the greatest night the house ever had, but that's a legend.
And it's reenacted.
And yes, well, this film was produced and edited, and they discovered that on another window, her hands were on one end, and there was a man's hand on the other with a great lace cuff.
Good Lord. And that was not set up by the...
No! I've not actually seen it, but all the people involved, there were 4 of us here. Nobody else in the house. It was totally impossible.
Yeah, but
But-
it happened.
Yes.
And how many of the inhabitants have actually been murdered?
Well, Robert Revel, Robert Revel's a bit of a thing. I found an old family tree done very soon after 1720, and in it says Robert Revel of Carnfield Hall, murdered by his servants in his bed, June 1713-14. Now, there are lots of other notes on this family tree, all sorts of odd bits of information, and I've checked all the others up, and they're all correct.
Right.
So there's a very good chance that this is correct too, but all his papers have disappeared, and it's a story that nobody knows anything about. But if he was murdered, he's the one, we've got his portrait in the hall, he's the one who turned the house round the other way
Oh, right.
round.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that that was his bedroom. It's at the front of the house.
This is the actual
Yes.
bedroom
Yes.
where the murder
Well,
could have
that's
taken
my
place.
guess, because when I first came here,
Can we go and have a look?
yes, absolutely. When I first came here, the furniture used to be hurled around in here. You'd hear it happening underneath. So bad was it that the room was eventually blessed. Nothing would ever happen. You'd come up here, it was like somebody hurling a wardrobe across
But
the
you
room.
heard it downstairs?
Oh
from
yes,
downstairs?
loads of times. Not every night and not once a week. You know, it would happen, twice in a month and nothing for 6 months.
Yeah.
And finally the room got blessed and nothing's happened since. But I had a psychic society here not very long ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and 3 of the ladies came in here not knowing anything about the house at all. And they all came out clutching their chests, saying, somebody's been suffocated in there. Now, if you were going to murder somebody, a nice clean way to do it
Creeping into
would
the
be
bedroom,
2 servants did it. Take a big bolster,
like the one on the end.
like
of
the
bed.
one on the end of the bed. I mean, I reckon if you stabbed somebody or shot them, it's so messy.
Yes, indeed.
and you know, and they stole his money. You see,
Yeah.
it was a robbery.
Could this have been the bed?
Not the actual bed, no.
But certainly in the room.
But one can read all sorts of things into this. But I think that's probably
Pushing it a bit.
yeah, pushing a bit. But
this is the room where you...
well, I would think so. Yes.
Amazing.
And there's a closet off it, you see, for his dressing room.
Yeah.
But yes.
Fantastic. Onwards and upwards.
So yes. Well, I always think of the ghostly ball, to which I've not been invited,
Actually taking place.
taking place in here.
And
yes.
of course, correct me, James, but when this was derelict, the police were often called out at night.
Oh yes.
Because lights were seen burning. Is that
Absolutely, on numerous occasions in the 60s and the 70s, and people would report that the house was on fire.
Yeah.
And when the police arrived here, and other people too, they often said that there was nothing here, but you could smell candles,
right?
as if they'd just gone out.
There was probably even no roof on at the time.
Yeah, there were holes in the roof.
Yeah.
Now, I did meet an old gentleman of the road, and I give him that
Yeah.
name on purpose. Apparently, there was a mark on the end of the drive to stop other gentlemen of the road staying here, because it's a house you didn't want to stay in. Haunted, yes. And they put a mark on the gate. And he told me he'd never have stayed in it. And apparently tramps did not. And there was no record of people, dossing down in here, because there was always somebody living at the back, you see. So, but the lights, and there's that idea, isn't there, that the balls of light.
Orbs.
Yes.
Those things, right?
I mean,
the
could
spirits
it be?
Of past inhabitants
Yes.
of the house or something.
Could it be?
Could well be.
Well, I'm the 20th generation, not of my family, but the 20th family to have lived here since 1475 and Dame Alice Babington. So 20 generations, basically, have lived in this
And
house.
that's the Babingtons, of course, of Babington plot.
Absolutely,
family,
yes.
Who were
That's
responsible
right.
for the execution
Yes.
of Mary Queen of Scots.
That's right.
Amazing.
So,
What a history.
yes, well, perhaps we get her coming back. That's Frances Revel in the little portrait there. And she died in 1736 of the smallpox.
Here?
Not here, no, in Nottingham.
Oh,
It was a
right.
terrible epidemic.
Yeah.
And she was only 20, she just got married.
Yeah.
And her love letters have survived, and
Really?
they're rather interesting.
She lived here?
Yes, it was her home.
Really?
And
So
we've
she
got
may
her.
well still
We've got
haunt
her
the
little
place.
pocketbook with all the expenses down to the last farthing. We know she played the spinet, and she liked drawing and painting like little girls did. And she had a pony called Dimple.
Good.
Got the bills for its hay. Now this room here, the southeast bedroom, there's a story, and I've never seen it again. There's a white lady who's meant to inhabit this, and apparently, according to my
I
mama,
was going to say...
she walked through this
your mother's
blocked-up
stayed
door.
there, yes.
And my mother was very clued up on this sort of thing and believed in it. And she used to, douse things with pendulums, and she was interested in all this sort of thing. But other people have seen her too. In here, and it's always women. Men never seem to see her. And she's there's a room behind here, which is definitely something was seen in there
the haunted
40 years ago.
yes,
A little
yes.
tiny
And
bedroom.
does that doorway lead?
Originally, it would have led to the dressing room, which led to the maid's bedroom. Now, whether she's an old maid, like an unmarried
Yes,
lady,
yep.
as they used to
Or a
call them,
servant
or a
maid.
servant maid, we don't know. But I think it's more likely to be an old maid, some aged and old unmarried member of the family. It wouldn't surprise me. And this was perhaps her room,
Yeah.
because she stands beside the bed. Well, I mean, you can believe it or not. But
Yeah.
it's surprising how many visitors here get a sense of it.
Really?
Very odd. And it's happened on numerous occasions. And
Especially to
in the
your
next
mother.
room. Yes, especially to my mother, who used to hear things too. I mean, things do get heard behind this wall. You can hear things moving about in the room behind sometimes.
Oh, gosh. And last but by no means least, of course, the children in the garden here.
Ah, well, you see, now that's been told to me by 3 or 4, I think 3 separate people, all of whose relations were servants here in the 19th century, maids and that sort of thing. Apparently, they used to gather the servants here on summer's evenings in the dusk, and out here on the lawn were 3 children playing bat and ball. 2 little girls and a little boy wearing a 3-pointed hat, 3-cornered hat.
Tricorn.
A tricorn, yes. And they played bat and ball, and eventually they just faded away, literally, just dissolved. Now, I'm pretty sure that's Tristram Revel and his 2 sisters, who were the illegitimate children of the Reverend Francis Revel. It's the right date. They couldn't legitimately inherit the house, but in fact Tristram did in the end, but I wouldn't be at all thrilled. They love this place.
Really. And actually, there's often an association with people that haunt places because they have such
Yes.
an affinity for
Yeah, well, they all loved it.
And because of that,
That's
they tend
right.
to still haunt. And you think it's those three children?
I don't see, it's so, I mean, they're the only ones of that in the 18th century where there are two girls and a boy. And they're all the right age. But I mean, I've never seen it.
No.
And I've never had any...
But there's even a Revel name on the...
Oh, well, that was found in, yes, Robert Revel of Carnfield.
Yeah.
Yes. And written, he died in 1729.
Really?
And he's written it on the window pane.
That's amazing. What a fitting way...
And he was the uncle of the children.
Really? So what a fitting way to end a trip to Carnfield Hall.
It's odd, isn't it?
James, thank you very much.
That's a pleasure. Anyway, I haven't been frightened too much.